And then capture, this is where you go when you want to adjust, not actually to capture the image, that you do over here in Enscape capturing, but this is where you control a lot of the settings as to what actually does get captured. So if you want to see this show safe frame, that shows like a little frame around it. This setting right here, export material ID and depth channel, these are two different channels that will export if you do a still image. So we'll give you the material ID, so it colors all the different materials in a bright color, which makes it really easy to select in post. So say you get it in Photoshop, your glass would be, I don't know, you can set it to be like bright blue. So that in Photoshop it's easy to use the wand and get that color throughout the whole image. And then the depth channel is cool for adding like depth of field. And this lets you set how far that depth channel is. And then where you want to save it, if you want to set a shortcut. And then under here is all the settings for your video animations. So how do you want it to be? Like super low quality, or how many frames per second? The more frames per second, the smoother the playback will be. So if you look at your video and it's kind of like choppy and it's still set to maximum quality, you're like, why is that? It could be that you're at a really low frame rate. So I always recommend at least start at 30 and then go up to 60 if you need to, and then unless it's like super important and you really want 120 frames a second, you don't really need to use that, because you would think 30 to 60 is just double, but you're really rendering 30 individual images per second. That's what it means, 30 frames per second. So it has to render 30 scenes. So if you start doing the math, I mean, it's definitely more than double the amount of time, because it gets, and then once you go to 120, it's kind of exponential. Like as you keep going up, it becomes 4 times more time just in the rendering, but your playback will be a lot smoother. So let's say you wanted to at some point like go into slow motion, like you would want to render at a much higher frame rate so that you do have that. You can keep, let's say you render it at 120, you can actually play it back at 60, and then in certain areas you can go down to 30, and then it would be really slow. But and then Panorama, this is if you want to do like those kind of like VR, like full kind of like envelope things. And customization sounds really cool, but when you get to it, it's really just for like the interface and like what icon it shows. You know how like when we launched Enscape, it said Enscape loading, and it said like the tip of the day. Like you can put like your own loading screen there. Let's say like you wanted to put like your firm's logo, so that when you're in front of a client, it doesn't show Enscape, it shows like your firm or something cool like that, or your glamour shots from your latest photo shoot. So that's all these settings. So that's, if you ever have any questions on how do I change this or how to change that, look at this, because then that will show you at least this is where these things live. And then the more you use it, the more you'll realize, oh, I shouldn't have changed that setting, or I need to go back and give it more like power than it had before. And you'll see like the biggest difference is once you go from interior to exterior, because there's two like kind of ranges there. So but it's not to say you can't get it to render nice outside and then transition inside. It just takes a little bit of work. And then